Our COVID-19 battle isn't over yet, and Singapore is continuing to beef up its preparedness for other infectious diseases outbreaks.
For instance, the Stronghold Diagnostics Lab currently used for COVID-19 testing can be repurposed for other screening efforts in the future. If you recall, the lab was set up to boost national PCR testing capabilities and has been operational since mid-2020.
Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat toured the lab yesterday, and in a Facebook post, he thanked the scientists and researchers at A-STAR and other research institutions here for their work.
Mr. Heng, who chairs the National Research Foundation Board, added that he was glad A-STAR worked closely with Singapore's broader R&D ecosystem and private companies to develop solutions for COVID-19. Well, let's take a wider look at Singapore's infectious diseases preparedness with Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan. Audrey, could you give us an update on the preparedness front, facilities, hardware, research and so on?
So one of the latest updates on this front will be the Stronghold Diagnostics Lab that DPM Heng Swee Keat toured yesterday. So even though this lab was up and running since the middle of last year, I think this is the first time that details of this facility were actually given by A-STAR today. So it's basically an initiative of A-STAR and the National University Health System and with Temasek Foundation as a supporting partner. And it was set up to boost polymerase chain reaction testing capabilities in Singapore. So, remember the early days of the pandemic when everyone was talking about the need for testing. PCR is considered the gold standard test to detect fragments of the virus in patient samples. And even though vaccinations are ongoing, testing still remains very important for Singapore. We have seen how people who get vaccinated can still get infected, and people can get reinfected even though they have already recovered. So it's important to continue testing people to ensure that, you don't see new outbreaks in Singapore. So that's one of the new things that that Singapore is looking at. And A-STAR has said that this facility can also be used to screen samples for other infectious diseases of the future. So that's one. And on the vaccine front, everyone's very excited about vaccines now. We've also heard that one pharmaceutical company, Sanofi, will be setting up a vaccine production center here in Singapore, and that this facility will be able to produce 3 or 4 different types of vaccine technologies simultaneously, including the new ones like mRNA, which is the technology that the COVID-19 vaccines approved for use in Singapore are using. So, these are just some examples and very important elements to preparing Singapore to prepare for future infectious disease outbreaks.
Right. Looking ahead, Audrey, what are Singapore's plans to establish the country as a leader in this field of ID preparedness?
So earlier I mentioned testing and vaccines, and these are, I guess, some of the more visible parts of infectious diseases preparedness. But of course, behind the scenes, there's also research, and that continues to go ahead as Singapore looks to recover from COVID-19. And one thing that was announced, I think, late last year when the new funding tranche for research in Singapore was announced, it included a new PREPARE program. So PREPARE stands for Program for Epidemic Preparedness and Response. So under this program, is meant to basically harness all of Singapore's scientific minds to transform discoveries into solutions, whether it's pinpointing the source of the outbreak to developing drugs or vaccines. And some of the possible research collaborations that could be carried out under this program includes working with researchers in the region to keep a close watch on pathogens circulating in animal populations. As we all know now, the coronavirus that caused COVID-19 is very likely to have jumped from an animal to a human. So that's why it's important to continue with such surveillance. And also fine-tuning models to understand how the disease spreads and how to keep it under control.
All right.
So I think research is a really important pillar.
Well, thank you so much, Audrey, for the updates. That was Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan.